Welcome everybody to PopDoc podcast. We have with us the filmmaker Sophie Sandor, who directed the short doc Tianah. Thank you for coming on the show. And I will ask you what I ask everybody is, how did you meet your subject? And then what was the moment that you knew that, hey, I'm going to dedicate 6 months of my life to making this thing?
Oh, how I met Tianah. Well, that's a very random and unrelated story because I ended up dropping out of university in the end, but just before I did, I got this scholarship, the Principals Go Abroad Fund. I was at Edinburgh to go to Beijing because I used to want to be a lawyer. So it was to work at a private international law firm called Jerusalem Law Group. And we got paired up kind of like in a Tinder fashion with people who we had lots in common with. And so I answered loads of questions and then got put in an apartment during this internship. So she was coming from Kingston University in London, and she was doing an internship at the British Embassy. And so we got put in this apartment together. We got to know each other, and she was always scrolling away on her Depop app. I think she only had a few hundred followers, but she was telling me about how she used to go to old vintage shops in London, buy the stuff, buy the lots of produce off them that they were going to throw away because they were shutting down. I don't know how she found out about this, but she did. She would sew it all up and then sell it on Depop. I don't know if you know what Depop is, but it's like an app that looks like Instagram, but it works like eBay. And the Financial Times did a big article about it at the time because it very quickly got 6 million users aged between 16 and 26. And now it's got many, many more users. Basically every young person who's on Instagram and under 30 has heard of Depop. It's quite widely known now. And yes.
And that's just an app where you can sell only clothing or like anything?
Only clothing or accessories. People sell posters and stuff, but it's all related to style. It's usually clothes, shoes, accessories, and then sometimes little posters and stuff of bands, but really it's just clothes. So she was sewing up these new clothes and these old clothes and selling them to make a profit. And she'd been doing this for a couple of years, I think. She was one of the first people on it. Then she became Depop famous, and she was operating this whole thing from her bedroom. And but yeah, when we were in Beijing, we were staying there together for a month, and then we traveled around China together for a month, which was already planned, but we didn't realize we'd both signed up to do this thing. So we were there, really got to know each other. We thought we weren't going to see each other for years, but then I happened to just drop out of university right after I returned from Beijing. After I'd finished campaigning in the Scottish independence referendum, I was working for the campaign, and then I moved straight to London right after the referendum happened. We won. Well, from my perspective, we won. I was campaigning for the union. And so Tianah and I became even closer because now we're both living in London. And she was making a profit. She became Depop famous, which really helped her brand. Depop famous, when you get over 250,000 followers, they throw you a party and loads of merchandise. And this really promotes you. And they share lots about you on social media. So she was getting interviews for magazines and things, and she was able to drop out of her job because she was making so much money just from sewing and redoing items of clothing. And then
how is she? Oh, I was going to say, how is she doing now? I mean, if she was at that place 2 years ago.
Yeah, well, that was actually, I think that was about 4 or 5 years ago. Pretty soon after, she was able to drop out of her consultancy role, which she went into right after university. She started her own line called Jollof Rice. And then she ended that pretty quickly. I think it wasn't taking off as much as she has very high expectations. And then she founded her second one, Slim Shady Sunglasses. Fast forward, today she's very well known. She's charging a lot of money for these sunglasses. She's released lots of different versions of these sunglasses. They became totally famous, the Slim Shady Sunglasses, whilst we were filming the documentary. I wasn't actually making the documentary because she had become successful yet. I was making it because I could tell that she was going to be successful, so it was just fun, like here she is in the beginning. But then whilst I was editing it, Beyonce wore the glasses and Bella Hadid wore them and Rita Ora, and then lots of Instagram famous millennials with millions of followers. So these things she was charging about £10 for, she's now charging about £100 for them. And she started making a lot of money, and she featured in fashion weeks all over the world and has pop-up stores. Before lockdown, she had pop-up stores all over the world. She was just in Selfridges in London just before lockdown, and then throughout lockdown, but no one was in the store. But during a little break from lockdown, so her glasses were actually there, and she's been interviewed in so many amazing magazines. And also she just made Forbes 30 under 30.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, so you picked a great subject. I mean, I really just personally enjoyed seeing a spotlight on an entrepreneur. I'm, personally fascinated in entrepreneurship. But I guess I was kind of surprised to see her going into her business and actually talking about profit being a necessity and being a good thing, and the virtue of business. And here on PopDoc, we definitely have documentary filmmakers from different points of view that come on, and that's not a common one to see. So I was, kind of surprised to see that in the documentary. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, it's amazing that you think that that she's actually kind of deliberately talking about it. She's not, other than what's necessary for her to know to be successful, and just because she's business minded and has been from a very young age. But she's actually not interested in politics or economics or anything like that, or even talking about the profit motive. I told her that I wanted to make a subtly pro-profit motive documentary, but she wasn't really interested in that element of it. I just told her so that she would know I was going to ask her to explain the profit motive and why profit isn't greed. But I just sprung that on her, and she said, of course it's not greed. It's if the poor wouldn't be able to get rich if they couldn't make a profit. And so I was just asking her questions, and she was able to articulate it better than a lot of economists do for the public or politicians. Well, there aren't many politicians promoting a profit motive, strangely. So yeah, she was just able to articulate it. It was absolutely amazing, the way it came across, because I was like, yes, exactly. I was getting really frustrated. I was going to dinner parties and events after work and stuff, meeting lots of people in their 20s, and or people who were at university, and they said I could never work for a profit-making company, which obviously is just ridiculous. Why wouldn't you want to work for a profit-making company? It means they're successful and they're needed and wanted. And just because something is registered as a charity, it doesn't mean it's doing better work necessarily. So I didn't want young people to see the profit motive as greed. I wanted them to know that it's necessary to human advancement, and that that's how we become better off. And it's a sign that we're creating value, because a thing is more than the sum of all of its parts. That's exactly mainly what we're trying to get across, what I was trying to get across.
Why do you think it's rare to find those messages in documentaries like yours?
For some reason, the business money making, it's starting more and more to be portrayed as greed and not very virtuous. And people are more interested in corporate social responsibility and what their business is doing for the community, or so they think. There's the perception that by operating and by providing a service, that's not enough anymore. I don't know why, but it's somehow not enough to be adding value, creating value, and providing a service. You've also got to show that you're being socially responsible and giving to the community, even though businesses do, that's how they manage to make a profit. But weirdly, there's this weird perception. And so because of this change in the culture and the way we interact with and see businesses, it's obviously not going to be, it's not going to feature in a lot of content online. But secondly, for some reason, people in the arts are, they tend to be more left-wing. I just did National Youth Theatre last year and National Youth Film Academy this year in the UK. And I was the only one who voted the way I did before, or had ever supported the parties I had before, or supported certain economic principles and movements. And I was the only atheist. That's not really relevant, but I mean, I found that I was literally the only one who was thinking in the way that I was. So I've experienced firsthand how the arts, they're all one way, and they're, what we keep calling woke.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta admit, when I think young female from the UK, I was surprised to see your point of view, on economics, etc. So how did you come to the beliefs that you have now?
Oh, well, when I went to my secondary school, my high school, when I was 11, I went there at random. I just said to my mum, it's next to my dance school. I just lived with my mum, and I wanted to be able to keep going. So instead of going to the school I was supposed to go to, I went to an even worse state school. And so ironically, I went there so that I could take myself to my dance school after school, because my mum was working during the day. And I arrived there with the intention of just focusing still on becoming a dancer and a singer and an actress. But that ambition quickly faded, because I got really interested in politics when I was at school, because the school was just wild. The behaviour was so bad. It's one of the worst performing schools in Scotland, and it has some of the very poorest postcode areas. We have catchment area allocation as well, postcode allocation, like in the States. So yeah, ironically, I'd gone there to continue in the arts, continue to dance, and I got interested in politics right away, and I was doing petitions and loved modern studies, which is what is politics, but it's called modern studies in Scotland. And I think the first time I started writing about it is when I was 15, and I was writing very socialist issues. I remember writing about how we should tax the things we enjoy to raise more money for the government, tax things that are bad for us. So tax the things we enjoy, tax the things that are bad for us. Like, it was very pro sugar taxes. I think it was to do with healthcare. And that was such a socialist essay, and it was based on stuff that I'd been hearing. And then I read, my boyfriend was in a band, and my friends were dating other people in the band, and we used to go into a bookshop in Costa Coffee, and we walked through it, and in anticipation of the film, the feature film, that British feature film, which is brilliant, Iron Lady, about Margaret Thatcher, they were re-releasing her 1995 book, Path to Power, and they were all calling her names and stuff. And I was 16 by this point. I couldn't remember who Margaret Thatcher was. I'd probably heard of her, so I was really out of it by that point. I was in, being cool and hanging out with people and not that into politics anymore. But then they seemed to hate this Margaret Thatcher, so I went back in and bought the book, because I thought, this is interesting. They don't like her, and they don't like a lot of the stuff I see, even though I wasn't a member of a party or anything. So I read it, and inside this Margaret Thatcher book, Path to Power, it's an autobiography of hers. It had a leaflet to join the Taxpayers Alliance, and it also talked about the Centre for Policy Studies, a think tank in Westminster in London, which she co-founded, or helped to start it up. They mentioned that think tank, and also the Taxpayers Alliance, which lobbies the government to lower taxes in so many areas. All think tanks in Westminster. And so that was the first time I heard of think tanks and free market think tanks. But then also a lot of the stuff she was saying, I found it very inspirational, and I actually already thought what she said, but obviously could never have articulated it like she had. So it didn't change my mind. It just made me think, wow, this is exactly what I think. And so I was like, finally, I have opinions that I can express, because I didn't know how to really debate or anything. But now I'd read someone's perspective, and I could articulate it based on what I'd read. So I joined the Conservatives when I was 16, the Conservative Party in the UK, and did an internship for my local MSP. An MSP is the member of the Scottish Parliament. Around about that same time as well, I saw a film by the Marxist Peter Mullen. He's a British social realism filmmaker. He's a contemporary of Ken Loach. They've worked together, and he's acted in Ken Loach's films. Ken Loach is famous worldwide. He's at Cannes, and he's won more than one Palme d'Or. and he is also very left-wing, and he gets involved in politics a lot now. So he's very political, even though he was just a filmmaker. So they are part of the establishment of the arts in this country, and they always get government money to make more and more films. Despite them being very socialist, I love the films. I just don't like how it doesn't have a positive, it's very social determinism. And as in, it says that people are stuck with what they have when they're born. It's very pro-victimhood mentality, all of their films. Like there's no way out, and it always shows a bad ending. Whereas I like the poverty porn, as people call it scornfully. I like that because it's like where I grew up, but I just wish there was a rags to riches direct to them. So yeah, I saw that film, Ned, by Peter Mullen, set against the backdrop of 1970s Glasgow gang violence. Saw that when I was 15, so around about the time I also got interested in politics. And as soon as I saw that film, I suddenly liked films. I didn't like films before. I didn't like going to the cinema. I certainly didn't like blockbuster films. And I knew that I was going to make films, but first I was interested in politics, so I went to study law, and then I dropped out 2 years into the degree and went to work in economics in London. So when I was 19, I went to work at the Adam Smith Institute. And the reason I knew about that free market think tank is at Edinburgh. I joined the Conservative Association, of course, because I had just joined the Conservatives and got very involved in politics. And one of my friends had just interned at the think tank right next to it, the Institute of Economic Affairs. And he said, it's amazing. Margaret Thatcher used to hang out there and all this stuff. And then he introduced me to Milton Friedman and Frederick Hayek and Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. And then so I didn't want to continue with university. Oh, well, I was actually just going to take a year out. I dropped out a year after I left. So yeah, I applied to do a gap year internship that paid the living wage in London, which was just perfect. So that's how I ended up in London working in free market think tanks. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna jump from economics back to film a little bit. Was, you know, those films that you called poverty porn or whatever, is that what got you into wanting to be a filmmaker? And why did you particularly start with docs?
Yeah, definitely. That's what the British social realism films are definitely what got me really, really excited. I found it so moving. This is the first one that I saw, Ned. And Ned is a Scottish word for chav. A chav you're probably more likely to have heard of. Someone
I'm
who
not sure what that.
Oh,
Sorry,
it's
what
someone
is that?
hangs out. It's someone who hangs out on the streets and is not well educated. Someone from the underclass, like basically where I'm from. So, so I can say that now. I forget that. I think it's being rude, but then I'm like, no, that's where I came from. I just forget something.
Maybe Americans younger than me know that slang. You know.
Yeah, a bit like all of the people actually in Gummel.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's the filmmaker Harmony I've forgotten what his name is. He made Kids about the AIDS epidemic in the 90s. That's the film. So yeah, he made this film Gummel. Funnily enough, yeah, it's connected to my first film as well. So yeah, that's basically what a Ned is. So I watched this film, Ned, set against the backdrop of 1970s Glasgow gang violence, which I don't know if you know, but it was incredibly brutal. We don't have guns, but kids would run around with huge blades, like, in their jumpers and stuff, like knife crime, huge. They would just take whatever they could find. And the gangs were mental. I mean, gangs in Glasgow still exist, but yeah, and Glasgow for many years was the stab capital of Europe.
Didn't know that.
So it was part autobiographical by Peter Mullen. He got into gangs in Glasgow and dropped out of school, didn't get any grades, and then they actually took him back, and he managed to get into Glasgow University to study economics and acting, a joint degree, which is very interesting, which explains why he's a Marxist. But the reason I actually started with documentaries is it was a few years into working in London. I'd already been at Edinburgh doing law, then I'd been in London working for a couple of years, and I thought, I never did do anything about making films. It's now been 5 years since I saw that feature film, because I was 20 by this point. And so I saw some articles about the slums in Govan Hill in Glasgow. Govan Hill is just a tiny part of of Glasgow. And it's a famous part because it's one of the most impoverished parts of the UK, and it's in the constituency of Nicola Sturgeon. And I just done Lights, Camera, Liberty at in LA. And then while I was in LA, the snap general election was announced, which, if you're in politics and think tanks, we were all being dramatic, and, well, not deliberately dramatic, but it looked very dramatic to an outsider. We were in the hostel and we're like, oh my goodness. So we had to get to work and preparing for the fact that there was about to be a snap general election when Jeremy Corbyn was running against Theresa May. So this election was in May 2017, and I thought, oh my goodness, I can release this documentary a few days before, and then it'll get really widely shared, which it did. So yeah, it was just thinking, how will I start? And given I had no experience in filmmaking, the best way was to pick up a camera and start filming something. And also, it would be a good way to make my first project in film successful, because I was working in think tanks. So plenty of journalists I know, and economists and politicians who agree with me, who would gladly share my film if it was about a political topic. So I made it a sensationalist piece, and it was in a tabloid in this country featured it in their newspaper, Sturgeon's Squalor, because it was about two opposing factions, one left-wing pro-independence, one left-wing anti-Scottish independence. Yes, the referendum had already happened by this point in 2017, but it was still a really hot topic, bizarrely. Like, it didn't go away for years. People were debating it as though the referendum was yet to happen. So this documentary was about these two opposing factions who disagreed on loads, yet they both agreed that the SNP, the Scottish National Party, had been terrible for the area that they'd all grown up.
So with you making Tianah, were you doing that by yourself? Was this the first film you made? Give us some background on the production process.
Yeah, so when I made Tianah, I'd already made one short little documentary, which was just for online release and featured in the tabloid here, the Daily Express. And I wanted to continue get more short documentaries under my belt so that I could so I could do various things. I wanted to show, before I crowdfunded for a huge budget, I wanted to show that I could actually do something with not a lot of money and just on my own. So that was the motivation for doing it, with no help and no editor and no one else. Because I didn't have the connections, actually. It's weird to think now because I'm really immersed in the film industry, but yeah, I didn't actually know a single person who could help with all this kind of stuff. It was someone at work whose son fixed the sound for me. And even that was through economics, that connection. So yeah, I set off with the camera, and I was going to make it a lot longer, but I quickly realised that I like the quick cut style, and I just wanted lots of people to watch it, and I wanted it to be shareable on Instagram and Twitter, and for me to be able to finish it faster. I just wanted to have something cool that was showing that I could combine the arts with the political economics world, which not a lot of people were doing. And that made me impressive to people in the arts because they didn't know many people with a background in think tanks. And then it was also a good thing for people in the think tank world, in politics and economics, because they didn't have many people who were in the filmmaking business. So I felt like I was finding a little niche, a little gap in the market, something interesting, combining two things.
Well, tell me what you're doing next. What other projects you have coming out?
So I'm releasing online in various parts a documentary about the UK's education system. So it's about why the poorest gets the worst deal out of the schooling system here. It's from an economic perspective. It features a cultural critic and psychiatrist. It features a philosopher, former philosophy lecturer at Cambridge University, and he was also a New Zealand politician. Now he's an economist. One of the world's leading experts on low-cost private schools for the poor, Professor James Tilley, and he's just taken his idea of low-cost private schools for the poor to the UK. He's founded one in the north of England, and it's going to become a chain, and that's doing really well. it's very hard to be an entrepreneur in education here because of planning restrictions and because of the almost monopoly that the state has on the education system. So he's managed that. And it features Toby Young, who's a very well-known journalist, activist, and free school founder here. Free school, the equivalent to charter schools in the States. And Catherine Burblesing, who's hailed as Britain's strictest teacher. She also founded a very successful free school. They just got results, actually, and they're the best in the country. Top in the country for Progress 8, which measures progress of disadvantaged kids. So, yeah, and also Tom Bennett, who founded an international organisation, Research Ed. They do conferences in New Zealand, Australia, the States, all over Europe, and loads in the UK, tackling edubabble, which is pseudoscience in the educational world. So that's my documentary. It's the topic I've been passionate about for now 14 years. So that's being released, and I'm going to do things with that, like talk about it, write about it, get a discussion going. And I'm also working on a feature film, Dancing as Banned, my first fictional feature film, Prohibition-esque era, inspired by lockdown life and poking fun at authoritarianism. It's a comedy drama. And also I'm going to make another documentary, which I was just talking about today, for some funding. I find out later today or tomorrow if I was successful in that, but I was just doing it before I came on the podcast, a little interview for that. So it was to get money to make a documentary about victimhood mentality in the world right now, in our culture, and about why it's harmful and why it holds people back and why it's defeatist and depressing and leads to people being unproductive, and the motivations behind people who are propping up the victimhood mentality of our age. So that's my next documentary.
Sophie, all that sounds very fascinating. You're a rising star in the doc field. We would love to be able to host any of your other documentaries on PopDoc, not just Tianah, but you did a great job with it, and thanks for coming on today.
Thank you so much.